Talk about all of this and more with Congressman Ed Royce of California. Is the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's joining us now live. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us. Let me get right to that last point that Brian made. How much of a threat is ISIS domestically here in the United States?
Well, I would say, Wolf, it's more a threat for Europe than for the U.S., but with the virtual caliphate on the Internet, ISIS has this capacity to draw from all over North Africa, Europe, certainly Central Asia, and that is exactly what you see. Most of their fighters, a majority of them, are now foreign fighters, and some of those, over 100, come from the United States as well. So it's those U.S. passport holders that are a real concern here.
We saw some really powerful, dramatic video that Ivan Watson came out of an Iraqi helicopter with, seeing people that are literally dying right now, but they're running for their lives. What should the United States be doing to save these tens of thousands of Yazidis, a religious minority, these Christians, and so many others who are being targeted now, some say genocide, by these ISIS terrorists?
Well, genocide is clearly the intention here on the part of the ideology, because it is convert or die. So for those who do not, they're targeted for extinction. Clearly what the United States needs to do is to make absolutely certain that the will of the parliament in Iraq, by working with soft power there, now you have the Shias, the Sunnis, the Kurds all agreeing Maliki must go. I called for Maliki to be gone many months ago because he was not working to be inclusive. But if you get a new inclusive government there, and that, of course, is the desire of the overwhelming percentage in Parliament and the president of the country, you get a new prime minister, then you get an effective cohesion in Iraq, and that's critical.
But that may be the will of a lot of people, but it might not necessarily be the will of Nouri al-Maliki and some of the forces, Shiite forces, who are very loyal to him, many of whom have tanks, armored personnel carriers, and they're threatening to take charge of Baghdad right now. Here's the question: what does the U.S. do if he launches a coup?
We're following that right now. And let me make the observation. We know that maybe a month ago or so, he put his son in charge of the military. He put previously a number of his lackeys into position of responsibility. But further down the officer corps, the junior officers know he has failed. His people, even his Shia coalition, know he has failed. He has no support to remain as prime minister. So you're right, he's going to give that order. But my presumption is, from what I hear in Baghdad, is that it's not going to be heard by the Shia, the Sunni, or the Kurdish political forces, and everybody right now has reached the conclusion that he must go. I think he's going to be forced out. I think it might be a little difficult over the next 72 hours, but I think at the end of the day he's gone. And that's the first opportunity for cohesion here against ISIS, because almost all of these defeats on the ground are a result of his wrongheadedness in terms of sacking people in the military who knew what they were doing. In terms of the Kurds who were going to defend Mosul, he ordered them out. He ordered his own units in, and of course those units ran away, right? So we need effective leadership in Iraq. This is a decision Iraqis are going to have to make. They've shown their support for changing that government. Now the parliament and the political parties have to go to work to force him out.
What should the president be doing that he's not doing right now?
Well, the critique is mainly what was not done when we had the opportunity when ISIS in Syria. And you've heard some of those arguments from our former Secretary of State. Hillary Clinton laid out the attempt to support the Free Syrian Army back before the foreign fighters even got there. And then once ISIS began to move out of Syria into Iraq, myself and many others called for armed drone strikes against those units before they ever could take Mosul. But now they've got this huge treasury, you know, the national wealth was in the bank up there in Mosul. They've got that at their disposal. So at this point, through airstrikes, we've got limited options. We are supporting the troops on the ground, including the Kurds, in order to try to turn back this onslaught and to prevent this humanitarian disaster.
So what he's doing is he's obviously authorized the airstrikes. He's dropping humanitarian supplies. He keeps saying no boots on the ground. The U.S. is not going to get involved on the ground, sending troops into Iraq to fight this battle. Only the Iraqis can do that, or the Kurds can do that. So on those basic points, you're with the president.
Yeah, I think on those basic points, the consensus is that now we have an opportunity with the Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces. If Maliki goes, they need to be the infantry on the ground, and we can provide some air support and certainly some weaponry to the Kurds, but that, I think, is the consensus right now.
Hillary Clinton, in the interview in the Atlantic magazine with Jeffrey Goldberg, said great nations need organizing principles, and don't do stupid stuff is not an organizing principle. That's clearly an implied criticism of the President of the United States, who was quoted as saying, don't do stupid stuff, words to that effect. Is she right?
Well, we'll add to that. Remember, this request for armed drone strikes, for strikes on those ISIS columns when they were coming out of Syria in order to start to take city by city, that critique comes not only from our former Secretary of State. That came out of our embassy. That came from the government in Baghdad. That came from many in the military who wanted to make certain that we were at least assisting to prevent ISIS from taking these cities. And that request was turned down by the president himself, despite these requests made internally. And that's, I think, the criticism.
Ed Royce is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.